All right. So today I've been trying to figure out how to word this together now for quite some time, and I'm probably better off just doing it rather than continuing to just keep thinking about it. But it's probably the biggest crutch a lot of people do to themselves with forced induction is viewing boost as a restriction. I said it. Even from big engine builders and stuff like that, you hear it all the time that it's what the motor is not consuming, it's a restriction, it's this, it's that. And it is, right? It's technically what the motor's not consuming. The problem with it is it completely skews most people's ability to understand what boost pressure is, right? And boost pressure is just a term we've coined. We could just call it atmospheric pressure gauge, and as atmospheric pressure increases, really cool things happen. So the issue with viewing boost as a restriction. First, I'll define how we can see it as a restriction. It is what the motor is not consuming. So the pressure rise is due to a compressor, whether it be a Whipple, a centrifugal, a compressor wheel, a piston pump on an air compressor, all we care, right? Feeding a motor. It is. It is what the motor, it's airflow being put into a contained area that it can't escape from at a rate faster than whatever is consuming it can consume it. The problem arises with that statement is that no extra context is generally added to it or associated with it. And usually anything that is associated with it is associated with doing cylinder head or cams to make more power with less boost. And then that goes into a whole other thing, right? Because then if all I said was that, one, boost is a restriction, and two, cylinder head and cams will make more power with less boost. The context that's not added into that is that generally, when a cylinder head or a cam makes more power with less boost, it's because the motor was able to rev higher, right? So when we're talking about in terms of the average diesel owner, they're looking for the system to consume more air at the RPM that they generally run it at, right? So if the head and the cam did allow it to make 200 more horsepower because the motor could rev 1500 RPMs higher before laying over, the next thing that you'd have to tell the owner of the vehicle is that instead of if you want the extra air that this head and this cam got you at the same boost level, instead of towing that grade at 1800 or 2000 RPMs, now you need to tow that grade at 3500 RPMs to realize the gains from the head and the cam. Right, so there's missing context from a lot of these statements that are true, but they're not being truthful to the owners. And essentially trying to break this down into a lot more simpler terms, viewing boost as a restriction means that you're viewing air as a hydraulic circuit. And it's not a hydraulic circuit, it is a pneumatic circuit. So why viewing boost? Why viewing boost as a restriction is doing yourself a disservice. Right? It creates a viewpoint that it is a hydraulic. And it's not a hydraulic, it is a compressible means that we are dealing with, meaning that we can take a cube or a sphere of this gas and we can compress it down into a smaller space. And if this sphere is completely contained or cube is contained, right? If we have 1 cubic foot of air, that way that's that's at 100 degrees, it's 0.07 pounds of air. If we take that and compress it down to half a cubic foot, then it's going to go up in pressure, but it's the same amount of weight. The sphere didn't get lighter or heavier being compressed into a smaller spot, right? We didn't lose any or gain anything, right? And now people will be like, oh, it gets hotter, it gets that, right? We're trying to put that off to the side right now because we've got to make this part make sense first, and then we can add in the realistic physics and all that crap that happens along with doing that. But before we get there, we need to make this part make sense, right? We're dealing with a compressible means. So by viewing it as a restriction, the problem is the pressure, and then the way to solve the pressure is cam head, and then what comes along with cam head is engine RPM. And for a lot of like hot rod application stuff, that's great. That's fine. Nobody has any problems with that. But most of the stuff that I deal with are tow rigs and daily drivers. So we're looking at engines that probably rarely see the high side of 2,500 RPMs, and average RPM is going to be 1,500 to 2,300, right? That's going to be where the owner operates, and my goal is to increase the AFR in that range. So it muddies the opportunity to make more accurate component choices, meaning this generally adds dollars, and because viewing it as a restriction means that advertising and advertisements from places that make things that do increase the airflow without additional context means that we tend to spend money on these things without understanding them, right? We're trusting the place that we're getting the things from, that their data is accurate and truthful. And it probably is, but it's generally missing info. Like if we look at like a cylinder head change on one of these things and we look at the RPM at 2,000 RPMs, there's usually a very small change in mass airflow at 2,000. There's not a lot of piston speed, not a lot of energy there. And screwing with the port velocity down at these low energy positions, it's easy. It's actually really easy to mess them up, and it's really hard to make them like substantially better. You can make them a little better, but the changes in airflow down at these lower engine RPMs are generally negligible, and a lot of that is due to the OEM actually kind of knowing what they're doing. They're not. They weren't out to get you from the factory with junk. Not in 1980 and up. Stuff's pretty decent from the factory. It's not that bad. We're also dealing with very low flow numbers and all that fun stuff on these diesel engines. So it's really easy to spend money on things that don't hardly do anything or don't help you very much. Like I said, heads and cams, I don't know how many times a month I got this cam, this cylinder head. What's the best turbocharger? It's all RPM based. And same thing, I have this turbocharger, this head and the cam, and it's still 1600 degrees, or it's still this, or it's still that. It's a whole system that's trying to work together, and because of the notion that a head or a cam makes the motor consume more air, which it can and cannot. Usually, it takes RPM to consume more air. That's the general whole premise of modern cylinder heads and modern cams is to move the power curve around. And by moving the power curve to a different RPM, we change the airflow potential. So if a cam is laying a motor over at 3,500 RPMs, and we want to take the motor to 5,000 RPMs, then we change the cam and or the head out to go to 5,000 RPMs. And if we go look at the mathematics for an engine turning 3,500 RPMs at 100% volumetric efficiency and a motor turning same displacement, motor turning 5,000 RPMs at 100% volumetric efficiency, we'll notice that the base CFM is substantially higher based on the base displacement of the motor. So the larger the displacement of the motor, the faster the CFM increases that the motor is asking for as it revs higher. Yeah, that all makes sense. It makes troubleshooting difficult. It really costs more dollars because if you can't do it, someone else is going to do it for you, which means you're paying for it, and it causes headaches, right? These are the headaches we're talking about. Why does it make troubleshooting hard? It makes troubleshooting hard for the owner because the owner doesn't understand the system, because the way that the nomenclature has been said for so long makes it difficult, right? So if we always look at boost as a restriction, then the problem becomes the boost pressure, and the boost pressure is not the problem. You know, cylinder head, cam, engine size, ability to intercool efficiently and properly. You know, those are all things that are can be technical, problems. But you can usually create more problems by overdoing the head and the cam and killing all the performance down at lower engine RPMs where you tend, like say tow rigs tend to operate, than you can by trying to fix it by making all these things really big. So I think a thing that's often missed, right? A motor, engine, whatever you want to call it, only consumes what it's asking for, and what it's asking for is this displacement and its volumetric efficiency. And now there's a range, right? The VE range. It goes up and down. The motor can be more than 100% efficient. Typically, diesels are not this way. Said piston energy is typically too low. And even on factory performance gas engines, or spark ignition motors, VE still tends to not really ever exceed like 110%. Like that's pretty good. I know, like I don't know because I don't design the engines, but listening to seminars and stuff, right? Your F1 motors and your NASCAR motors and your like bracket cars and stuff like that, they're 124% ish. Like these are very, very narrow RPM engines. So if that's the top of the tier, and then the bottom of the tier for most modern motors modern diesels is around 80 to 95%, and then your spark ignition motors are modern, 90 to 105, 110%, 108%, somewhere in there. There's not like a lot of room at the same engine RPM to increase the VE to a point that underneath peak horsepower, that it makes a profound difference in the way the motor consumes air. So what that means is that if you operate your motor at 2,000 RPMs towing up a hill and you put a head and a cam in and you gain 3% VE, the total mass number, airflow increase, is still relatively small, right? Because we might have a 6-liter motor, but we're only turning at 2,000 RPMs. That's not a lot of RPM. And what that means is that because the motor is not big enough and it's not a lot of RPM, not a lot of airflow. And what you want to do with turbochargers is forced induction turbochargers, all the stuff. What it does is it multiplies the motor's displacement. Or, should better say, it multiplies what the motor is consuming because it's a compressible media. So if the motor can only consume a 1x1 cube every 2,000 RPMs, if we add 15 pounds of boost pressure, what we'll do is we'll take a 2x2 cube and it will be compressed together. Remember, we are not doing losses, to a 1x1 cube. And then the motor can consume that, right? So the motor can now consume twice the amount that it was originally asking for. So if this motor consumes 100 CFM at 15 pounds of boost, 14 pound, whatever number you want to use, whatever double your PSIA is, it goes to 200 CFM. That's how that works. It's that simple, right? So now that's the next thing is there's losses, there's no gains because we always lose stuff. The gain is the pressure. So that's why boost is important, because we can take this cube, and because air is compressible, it's a pneumatic, not a hydraulic, we can compress it down to this cube, and this fits in our engine, this does not. So to make this fit in the motor, we make it smaller by compacting it together, by compressing it. Remember, there's no restrictions now. We're just going to get rid of the restriction part. The restriction is your wallet and how big you can make your motor and how high you can rev it, right? That's the restriction. Pressure above atmospheric solves for that because we can take this and compress it. Remember, if this was a hydraulic circuit, an injector, we can't. This would be completely correct. If air was not compressible, we would have a hydraulic circuit, not a pneumatic circuit, and boost would be a restriction. But we're dealing with a gas. Gases can be compressed together, meaning that it is not a restriction. And we do want the restrictions inherent in the system, and it can't make it go away, right? So if boost is such a bad thing, and you have a boosted application, lower your boost pressure by half. See what happens. Power go down or does power go up? Right? And there's all the nuances of, yes, there is a point where increasing the boost pressure doesn't have as much ROI, or it has a negative ROI, return on investment. And that's not because of the boost pressure. It's because of the system is going inefficient. There's other things in the system, turbochargers, turbine side, turbochargers, compressor side, centrifugal superchargers, how much horsepower does it take to drive the supercharger, blowers, how much horsepower does it take to drive the blower. All right, those are the more technical nuances of the system that causes this to appear to be this way, and it's indeed not how it is. That's why, like, we spec out a system, we're looking at how much power the system's going to make, how big is the motor, how high does the motor have to rev, because of the motor size and how high it can rev or where it needs to operate. How much pressure do I need? Does this system run efficiently at this pressure and this mass airflow or not? That's what's going on. So hopefully that was helpful. I think I covered everything. Boost is not a measure of restriction. It is a measure of compression, because we are dealing with compressibles. And it's fantastic that it works this way, because if it would work like a hydraulic, we would not be making the power that we do. I can tell you that much. Right? Probably also wouldn't be this affordable to do so up to a point. But look at every single Pro Mod. They go faster as they turn the pressure up. You can keep doing this until something in the system is no longer working properly. And in the case of going up, it means generally that the compressor or the turbine side of the system is too small. And you can keep making this bigger until the motor itself no longer has enough energy output to continue to increase the pressure in the system, right? Think factory non-wastegated diesel turbochargers. You just make the turbine housing so big that based off of the engine's energy output, the pressure gets to this point and then ceases. And then on these non-wastegated setups, as you turn up the energy coming out of the motor, increasing fuel delivery, what happens with wastegated systems? The pressure goes up. It's a poor way to do it, because in order to do that, you got to make everything big enough that it doesn't work that way. But if it's a narrow RPM setup, works perfectly fine. Wide RPM setups, not as great. I think that's everything. Right? This is really base, super base. We're not getting into temperature rise. We aren't doing horsepower to rotate turbine wheel, horsepower to rotate compressor wheel, flow separation, entry angles, expansion ratios, pressure ratios. I mean, we probably could do pressure ratio real quick because that's a good one. Pressure ratio, it's your PSI absolute plus gauge pressure divided by PSI absolute. Now, if you want the pressure ratio for the turbocharger, you measure the pressure outlet at the turbocharger. If you want the pressure ratio for the motor, which is the one that the motor cares about, the motor actually could care less what the pressure ratio at the turbocharger is. The motor cares a lot about what the pressure ratio in front of the intake valve is. That's how you can find mass flow. So you take the motor's normally aspirated CFM, so whatever the motor's asking for NA, multiply it by the pressure ratio, and multiply that by the weight of the air per 1 cubic foot or 1 cubic meter, wherever you are at, however you want to do it. The weight per cubic meter is the temperature base number. So you want to have an IAT sensor, and then there are charts that are quick reference, and then there's actual calculators that allow you to put in all the humidity and everything, altitude, to find an even more accurate representation of what it weighs per 1 cubic space. And there you go. That's the mass flow. So if you want to find the mass flow going out, take the NaCFM times pressure ratio, and then multiply by the temperature of the exhaust gas, and then add in your fuel by weight. Yeah, pretty sure that's how it works. Or at least that's the closest version of it I've gotten to so far, because you can't destroy matter. So what goes in has to come out, it just comes out at a different temperature. All right. Yeah. So boost, not a restriction. Boost is awesome.